All right. All right, everybody. Welcome to Dad Influence. Um, I'm suffering right now. I'm on day 6 without my son. He went off to Virginia with his mom, so they're going to visit family. I have to stay home to work, so it's not fun. But I've been able to spend a good amount of time with my nephews. So it's like suboxone to my sudden withdrawals.
So you're not the point yet where you're relishing the time alone.
Oh no, definitely not. Like what's crazy is man, I have hardcore ADHD,
Hmm.
and like I like my time to be all occupied. I have issues with being bored. It really gets to me. I always have to have something going on. And that to me is the greatest gift of a child, is the fact that I have not been bored in the last year at all. And now that he's out of town, I'm like, what do I do?
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that's good. That's unlike most of my other friends with kids.
Yeah, like I really enjoy the whole parenthood
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, they
But
enjoy, but yeah, it's the that little bit of time for themselves that they can get every now and again. They really appreciate. They're
maybe
probably
it's
listening.
just not been long enough for me.
Could be. You might get there in a little bit.
But anyway, I had you on. I think you basically kind of wanted to put forth like government versus anti-government, and I think we both agreed that that's a little bit too simplistic.
Yeah,
Um,
it's simplistic, but it's also probably a good starting place where we
right,
can
and I
dive
was
into the
wondering if
differences.
maybe the better assertion is, does government hurt more than it helps?
That that could be one way of looking at it. And again, it's
Like I said, because I think I think Thomas Paine said this, and this is something that I would agree with, is that government is at best a necessary evil. So if it is necessary at all, it's still evil, but it's at best just a necessary evil.
see, I that's the thing is like you're coming at it from a point where it's inherently evil. And while I'm not going to pretend like there's not good reason to think that most forms of government we've had are evil and have their pitfalls, for me at least, it's the kind of what you're looking to do is looking how can you do it better, how can you make things better, as opposed to how can I reduce it so much that that's going to be better. Like, yeah, I think it's the difference is the idea that everything would be better with less government versus, hey, maybe government just needs to be structured in a way that does better.
Right, and I think I think that's what a lot of people misunderstand about the minarchist side of libertarians. That's kind of what they're arguing. They're arguing that the NAP is a better way of organizing government in the first place. Like if you set up those guidelines to never initiating force and only responding to force, then there would be a lot less complaints with the government.
Yes, there's that, but I think
So
also
that's kind of my point is like if you were to constrict the government within the NAP, then you would have a better situation. And the thing about it is like, because that's at the end of the day, governments are collectives and collectives are people.
mhm.
And really, like the beef that a lot of, like, from a philosophical angle, libertarians, it's just we kind of define government as any collective that uses force to gain its means. So it's just government at that point. So that's the reason why we say government is at best necessary evil. Because like if you don't use force and you are trying to achieve good, they call you a charity. You know what I mean? If you don't use force, if it's a voluntary collective of people who decide, this is how things are going to be in this area, that's a homeowners association. You know what I mean? We don't really call those things government because it's not really force. It's people coming together to decide what they want to do. You know what I
But
mean? Or a church. You
But
know what
I
I mean? It's no force. You decide to join that church. You decide to be a part of that church, and you decide to come there every Sunday.
I think
Everything is
though
voluntary.
also the flip side though is like also though when you look to force that you get with government, you like with most minarchists they'll usually do something like, oh well, taxation is a form of force or this regulation is a form of force. And I don't see the difference necessarily between say a homeowner association and them levying fines or whatever on a homeowner, or a church, maybe like not inviting you to the Sunday cookout or something if you're not given enough in the donation basket. It's kind of like the same thing. It's more like I guess a lot of it is that I don't necessarily see that there is a lot of physical government force in most people's lives.
Right, but that's
Uh,
because most people avoid the force. The threat is there. And that's kind
I
of the thing. Just because most people comply to it, it doesn't mean that there isn't much force. You know what I mean? And that's kind of the argument that a lot of people make with cops that I think is kind of ridiculous. It's like, well, if you didn't do anything wrong, just comply. And it's like, yes, I kind of agree with that because it's easier from a law standpoint for you to get, you know, to get it thrown out, get all those things. I kind of agree with that, but I don't believe that it should be expected. It's like if somebody's throwing you on the ground because you have loose cigarettes that you're selling for 50 cents, like it's kind of expected that you should be able to defend your life at that point, in my
sure.
opinion. Like, so it's kind of like it's a catch 22 in that situation, and I get that. So it's
But
like that's the situation though, is it's the threat of force. You know what I mean? Like we can talk about what most people don't have to deal with this force, but some people do. And like I said, what is the threat of loose cigarettes being sold? That government misses out on some taxes.
there's
You
a
see
lot
what I'm saying?
there's
Like that there's literally a man killed right there because we wanted to make sure we got
that's
taxes. And so that's kind of the point that I'm making is at the end of the day, it's like I get that we need to fund these things, but I really don't think you need to fund these things through force. I think the things that you need to fund through force are the things that people don't want. The wars that are, forever fought. You know what I mean? That's the things that you have to fund through force. Well before we had income taxes, we had roads, and the roads were better. You can look at that. That's a fact.
but
You know what I'm
that's
saying?
but
Because
that's
people had to, but they had to.
well hold
The businesses had to keep the roads up so people could get to the businesses so they
but
could make money.
is that actually how it happened? Like was it actually
Yes, that's
businesses?
actually how it happened. The businesses built a lot of these roads, like New York City. You can look at pictures of New York City in the 1910 and in the early 1900s, and there's roads everywhere because, like I said, they had to. The businesses wanted people to come to their store, so you built a road so that way you could make sales.
But are
You
you
know what I'm saying? Even in the ancient days, it was always wealthy merchants that built roads so they could make money on the roads.
I mean, I'd have to look into that, but I think that the thing is though is you're tying into income tax, which doesn't build roads.
but the thing about it is that's the trick, right? Is like I think a lot of people don't like intuitively we know that rich people pretty much own the government, but why would they buy the government to pay less to take care of society or pay more? I mean, why would they buy the government to then turn around and pay more into society? You know what I mean? By the way that they have it set up now, it's like they get to pay all these loopholes and all that, and then all the poor people through our gas consumption, like a business, their gas consumption is written off on their income tax. So they're literally writing off their gas tax on their income tax, so they're not paying either one.
Sure. There's I
You see what I'm saying? But I'm not doing that. So when I go to work and pay for gas in my car, I'm paying for the roads now. So they just found a way to circle it around to where now the poor are paying for the stuff they used to have to pay for.
that's that's a valid point, but
You see what I'm saying?
I
And
would
the thing
I but
is
I was the
go
same
ahead.
though. I'd counter with that though. That's one of those things that I think that we need to fix. Whereas your fix is, oh, let's just get rid of it, and that's going to make it all better. And I'm like,
Well, this is the thing that I think that communists really fucking nailed. To be honest, this is the thing that really they nailed. Is it's like this isn't something that it's a feature, not a bug. There's never been a government that wasn't owned by the rich. Never. Even the quote unquote communists, because it was socialism. Even those were owned by the rich. It was all the people who were well connected to the government were the rich at that point. The bourgeoisie were all the people who were in charge of the government. This is something that was pointed out by Bakunin. And like I said, this is a very big thing because he was saying that was the issue with the dictatorship of the proletariat. Because if the proletariat take over, they become the bourgeoisie. And they thus become disconnected to the people on the bottom because now they're in charge.
So if that's, I mean, but you do understand why there's a dictatorship of the proletariat, right? Because you can't actually make that transition without a revolution.
So, I get that. I get the argument, but like I said,
that's kind of
where, like I said, I think that there's a lot of wisdom in a lot of different schools of thought.
Sure. There is, and it's more.
And like I said, it's a feature, not a bug. It's what government does. If government is what it was literally created in the beginning. It was a guy you had a guy, he grew a farm, and then he had all the food, and then all the people came to him, and then he made them work on their farm, and then he had the biggest house, and eventually he was king. Governments in the first place were built to protect wealth. That's what they're for. So you can't change that. You can't use it's like trying to bribe the henchman enough money to turn against Al Capone.
Well,
he works for Al Capone.
Part of the thing
paying him more money doesn't make him stop working for Al Capone.
I'd say that part of the thing, like, so you got a couple different things here. Like, you're again reverting back to the idea that government is inherently always going to be that, which I don't necessarily think is true. Obviously disagree, but also, even as you say that, like, the weird thing is that, like, our government isn't really made by the rich. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that a lot of the people in government aren't rich, but I don't know. It just always strikes me as weird when people are pointing towards government as a way for people to get rich, and it's really not that great of a way to get rich. You don't make that much money being in government. Like, it's
not necessarily in local government, but yes, you go across the board in all of these people. Like, you got people that have been making $200,000 a year and are billionaires because of all these side deals and all these stock buying that they're like. To be real, it is a big corrupt situation, and it's not. I
don't know if the data would actually really fully support it. Not saying it doesn't happen, but I think that
Nancy Pelosi has a better stock portfolio than Warren Buffett. She has literally broken records. No, not her husband. But let's be honest, we know what's going on there. She has the best stock portfolio in the history of the U.S. Do you think there's nothing connected to the fact that she's Speaker of the House and she knows what's coming before it comes?
I mean,
You don't think that's insider trading?
This is the first I'm hearing of it, so I wouldn't have.
Yeah, you'll have to look into that. But like, it's kind of one of my things. That's my point. Is it's like you can look at all these guys. It's like they go from broke to rich. Like, even like Hillary Clinton talks about that, like how she was in debt going into the White House, and there's some of the richest people in the world, or like richest former presidents on the planet. You know, and I know that's a small group, but it's like you start to look at all the things that she's involved in, and the Clinton Foundation and all that. I mean, it starts to make sense.
Also, it's like, I don't
know. Like I said, and to me, like I said, I'm not saying that, you know, with a.
I say I'm like, I'm kind of curious. I'm looking up how much the Clintons are worth, because you have a couple of different problems. One is that, like, most people in government are already rich when they get there.
For sure.
mostly that's a function of campaigns and the high cost of actually running them.
Right. Oh
So
yeah.
I mean, you have
Don't get me wrong. I'm
you
all about reform there.
yeah, I mean, you need to reform there, but then you get into government, you're not necessarily making that much. Yes, there is an opportunity for corruption, but also there's a lot. And hey, I'm not saying it's perfect. Maybe we do need to crack down and and put in place better rules for trading, say stock trading, if if you're a Congress critter. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, I don't know, like the Nancy Pelosi thing. It's like, from what I've looked at, I don't know if it's outperformed. I know that like her husband invested in a bunch of, like, they live in the Silicon Valley, and he invested in a bunch of tech companies, which is kind of the story of every single person in Silicon Valley. So it's not, to me at least, it's not that surprising. I mean, this is honestly the first time that I've heard that she's got the best stock portfolio, that her family has the best stock portfolio ever. So if I could verify that, then that would be something worth looking into. But from what I know and what I've read, it's like he invested in Google. It's like, oh,
Yeah, and
of
like I said,
course.
people started raising hell about it, and now she's trying to kick the can down the road and say, "Oh, well, we're about to go into break, and maybe we should bring this up after break." She's like trying to let it die down because they're trying to make a law now and make it where
Sure.
you know
See, so
they
yeah,
can't
like,
do that anymore.
looking at the Clintons, I mean, yes, it's rich, but it's 120 million. That's like, in terms of like rich people, that's a relatively low number, you know? I mean, hey, I'm not saying that they're poor, that they're on the same, like the same
Right,
level as you and me, but again, the dude that he was the leader of the free world. They obviously, with presidents, you command big speaking fees. It's pretty easy to amass a lot of money pretty quick like that. But at 120 million, it's like, it's that's like the low end of filthy rich.
right. But at the end of the day, the point of the matter is like you know it's kind of an irrelevant point, any of that, to the real factor of what we're really talking about, which is like at the end of the day, I don't think that the state is something people should be doing to get rich. I think it should be a service activity.
Sure, no, I 100% agree. And like I said, I'm not against proposals that come out that say would limit. I mean, my big question with that is like, how far out do you take it? Is it
Oh,
people in government?
I'm 100% behind limiting the congressman's pay to median wage,
Oh, I mean, well, with that, I mean, that's I'm more thinking of stocks.
not minimum wage, median wage. So
I
I think that's a better argument, because then at the same time, it's like you can't get median wage just by raising the top. You'd have to raise the top a lot to get median wage. So you'd actually have to get across the board average wage. You could just raise the top and then ignore the bottom. So I think that would be a really good way of encouraging them to actually do things that matter for everyone.
mhm.
So
I mean, see that, but the downside I see to that, and this is the thing, is I think like I feel like a lot of people's opinions on Congress people are driven by, and again, just I understand it, but it's driven more by emotion than anything that would actually happen. So you say like you want the median wage because you think that's gonna be a way to get better representation for the poor people, but on the flip side, we already have a problem where you need to be rich to get into office. And if you need to live in two states and you're doing it on a super low wage, you're gonna have to already be rich to actually get it. It's like most of the people in Congress don't need the money they make in Congress to make ends meet. So I like the idea of like maybe even raising pay for people in government to ensure that we're getting the best that we can, and also to give more people an opportunity to do it. Which, yeah, I mean, it
yeah,
seems counterintuitive, but that's kind of
maybe
like
I
where I
would
think
agree
about
with
it.
you
It's
more at the
rates.
local level that maybe pay should be raised. But honestly, I think you're getting adequate pay. It's similar to like a CEO at a small but profitable company. that they're getting paid now. So I don't really think that they're underpaid for what they're getting, for what they're doing.
It's
I hear the argument of, man, if
most of
they're
them,
paid more, maybe they won't take bribes, but I don't really think that's a good argument. I
most
think
of
that
them,
corrupt people are going to take more money either way.
I think overall, like for most of the country, that's probably the case because most of the country is. But say like, you know, people in like New York, where it's like, you know, you need to maintain a residence in DC, and you need to maintain a residence in wherever your home is. And if I'm living in Cleveland, it's not too hard because it's kind of cheap to live in Cleveland. But if I'm, you know, living in San Francisco or New York, or like if I'm representing and need to live in a major city for that portion, then you know that it gets pretty expensive pretty quick. And you know, and
Well, I've
all of a
also
sudden
argued
it's
that
like,
I
you
think
know,
that the representatives should get paid from their district, not from the federal government either. Anyway, because that's who they're working for.
sure, but then again, you run into the same point where it's like, what happens with poor districts? You run into like the same thing with schools, where we fund schools.
Well, that's kind of the point. Is if you're
local
talking
way.
about a poor district, then you're again like the argument you just made becomes irrelevant. If it's a poor district, then it shouldn't be that expensive for them to have housing there and in the other place.
There's that.
But if
there's
it's
that,
not,
but also,
you know,
well, also poor districts don't necessarily mean everybody there is poor.
just like I also think that like yeah, I know that, but I'm just making the point that like the cost of living there is not going to be in a poor district. It's not going to be the same as it is in a richer district. And I honestly do think that that's one of the best ideas for campaign finance reform is geographic blocks, where it's like if you're running in for Florida Senate, then you should only be able to receive money from Florida. And if you're running from, you know, Florida District 18, you should only be able to receive money from Florida District 18. If you're running for president, you should only be able to receive money from the U.S. You should only receive money from jurisdiction of the place that you're running for.
I mean, I can see that. I can just also, I can see where you're coming from, but the thing is I can see a few ways where that I could see that backfiring and kind of exacerbating.
And I also don't think you should be able to spend money that isn't yours. So like basically
the taxation is theft idea.
No, not even necessarily. Not even it's similar, but in the idea of a corporation. Corporation is a publicly traded entity. It's owned by the shareholders. So if you give money as a corporation to a political party, you're stealing from the shareholders.
Unless the shareholders, I mean,
would agree. And then, like I said, if that was the case and they voted and it was like 80-20, then you should have to give 80-20.
This, you know, and this is also
you know what I'm saying?
Sometimes, like, so like then you get the creation of PACs and whatnot, political action committees. But the thing is I would need to look into it, but it seems like every time I look up money that comes from companies, it generally actually comes from the people in the company as opposed to the company itself.
Right. Now, yeah, if it's used specifically in a company, spend your money how you want to. I'm not worried about that, but I do know that there's that. There's also charitable organizations that'll give to candidates. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it's like people gave you donations to go do charitable acts, not elect politicians.
I mean, unless of course the charitable act requires electing politicians.
Well, like I said, not unfair in that, and like I said, and if that's what's said in their site, hey, this is what we use their money for. Then when you give your money, then obviously you would assume that that's what's going to get used for, right? And so that's kind of my point. Is like to me, and I've seen a lot of issues, a lot of situations with stuff like that, where it's like I said, there's people that are giving out money that's not necessarily theirs to give. They're just in charge of an organization, and they're giving it on behalf of that organization. And to me, I think that's not okay.
You know, I think again,
that's not a taxation. It's not a taxation in that the government, quote unquote, is doing it, but it is still force enacted by an organization, in my opinion. If like I said, if that money wasn't allowed, then that money wasn't allowed to go that way.
like I said though, the thing is though is if you're just basically limiting employees and how they can give, then
No, like I said, I'm not saying that. I'm not having any issues with
but
that. But
well
like
that
I said,
what I'm
you're
saying though is
saying most of it is employees, and I have no issues with that. But there is or there are instances of corporations giving to political action committees and giving to candidates.
but okay, so where's the
And
line
that's
there?
where that's the whole Citizens United situation, where they were saying that money is speech and that
Mhm.
corporations are people,
But okay,
so they
but
can give money to what I mean. Which
where's
I
the
do agree, money is speech. You do have a right to give money as a person, but I don't believe that a corporation is a person. That's stupid. Corporation is made up of people, and those people individually can do whatever they like with their money.
Mhm.
But once the whole point of a corporation is to make an entity that's not you. And if that's the case, you can't use it like it's you. It's like
Sure.
if you're going to use this to get away, to be able to say, hey, if something happens, I don't get sued, the corporation gets sued. Then in the same token, you can't use that like it's you to advocate for who you want.
I think that we're going a little far afield, but also it's like I'm part of a union. I work in film, and
Right.
my union we have a PAC that we're all encouraged to donate to, and our PAC advocates for labor issues, and B, within the film industry, the entire thing is driven basically by tax credits that companies get from various states. And New York, where I live, has a very generous tax rebate system that is probably why that there's a lot of production here, like more so than LA now. So like we give to a PAC, and our PAC goes up to Albany, and they speak on our behalf and basically keep the tax rates going, which keeps us all working. So
So basically, what you're saying is you're working because the taxes are lower.
oh no, it's because there's an actual rebate.
You get what I'm saying, though. But like, you wouldn't need a rebate if you weren't taxed that in the first place.
It's
It's a rebate on the taxes, so it's only you getting money back on taxes that were already paid.
to an extent, I think it actually goes above and beyond that as well, though. And
Right.
the reasoning is that,
The
that
point
there's the
being
ripple
is if they
effect.
weren't taxing you in the first place, then they wouldn't have to give you a rebate.
Sure, but also if they weren't taxes in the first place, then we probably wouldn't be worth filming it here. I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of thing that there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen on the ground to create a place that we can actually film in.
Right.
And
But
yeah,
like I said, but anyway, the other end of that, I'm just pointing that out, that it's
Mhm.
kind of an interesting it's kind of an interesting point there in that. But like, I get what you're saying, and like I said, I get the idea, but like I said, that the whole idea of tax havens attracting business is kind of the point that a libertarian is making. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? It's
I
just
can
like, it's not that those places don't, like, do you really think New York has no charitable outgoing? Do you think these film people that are all working are not giving out money to make sure that people are eating and make sure that people have things? Like, to
sure.
me, in my opinion, I think that if you gave that 30% more to people, yes, some people would hoard it. That's true. But I think the majority of people would actually help. And I think that I help now, and I barely make money. You know what I mean?
I
I'm getting taxed pretty heavily too.
this is but that's I mean, I don't know that I necessarily agree there, because it's literally generally a rebate given to out of state companies who are coming here and doing work. And
Right.
the entire thing is it's the
The
whole
whole point is to attract people to come there.
yeah, and that's
And that's kind of the point. If you know that low taxes attract,
it's more
then
it's more the rebate.
what does that tell you if the whole country was like that? And that's kind of my point. That's what it was at
But
one point, and that's
this would
why
be
people were flooding here from all over the world.
but it's not necessarily an income tax thing. Like we're like income taxes are still all
Yeah, income tax is only one tax. There's 900 different taxes, and we can go into it forever if we wanted to.
It's a business and it's a sales tax rebate that they're getting, and that's where a lot of it's coming from. But it's still all income tax because I'm paying income tax on what I make.
Right.
Hundreds of people I work with are paying income tax on what they make. And the big argument in favor of it is basically the ripple effect that comes on where they spend, and it's like we need to buy, say, flowers for.
What would you say the percentage of your income that's captured in tax is, probably, between property taxes, between income tax and sales tax?
It would be hard to calculate the property tax thus far because I've always been renting. And especially in New York, the way that property taxes are calculated is a little crazy. It's an issue where like you can actually literally buy a $100 million penthouse apartment on like the 100th floor of some building overlooking Central Park and pay less in taxes than somebody with like a very modest single family home like on the outskirts of the Bronx.
All right, it's probably based off square footage more than worth of the house.
It's something with like development incentives, and it's a whole Byzantine thing. But
tax rebates for certain people and for others.
Something like that. I can't even. I can barely. I know the numbers. The way it actually functions, I can barely wrap my head around. But yeah, it's very weird there, and especially now that we've moved upstate a little bit, where it's like I can see like more directly what income tax or what property taxes are being paid. It's little different from what I.
But the point being is like, let's just say it's 30%, right? So if it was 30% less and your boss paid you 15% less, he would make more money and you would make more money. You see what I'm saying? So it's like that tax is still getting paid.
Also, though,
pretty much by both of you.
I'm coming though from a place where it's like the tax is almost irrelevant to my wages. If I got taxes,
right, and that's
my employer
Friedman.
My employer would still not be he'd still be trying to pay me as little as possible. Like we're involved in a big fight.
Just like you want to get paid as much as possible.
Yeah, but
just like when you go to the store and you want to buy a video game, you want to pay as little as possible. When you go buy an apple, you want to pay as little as possible, and they want to sell it for as much as possible.
I don't know. I don't always.
That's something I've kind of pointed out to people is like, to an extent that's unfair to kind of look at it like that as somebody being selfish, in that like you've never gone and got a video game that you paid $60 for and gone, dude, this game is really good. I really think it's great, and mailed money to the developer because you were like, oh, it's actually way worth more than $60 to me. You know what I'm saying? So nobody volunteers to give more money unless it's demanded. And that's kind of what the pandemic really taught us about wages. And that's part of the reason why once the people kind of demanded that they got paid more, you know what I mean? And McDonald's couldn't keep any staff and Taco Bell couldn't keep any staff. It's still happening right now. That's why the wages for those people are skyrocketing.
Sure.
Because they demand it.
Though I take a little bit of an issue with, and I think this is more something fundamental. It goes back to
same reason why you have a union, because you're demanding it.
There's lots of issues that I can't speak on, but we're working on it. But I was gonna say though, also though, like I don't know though that I necessarily would agree that everybody's always looking for the lowest price. I know it was actually something I kind of learned as a kid because my dad was definitely always looking for the lowest price, and he would always just buy like cheap garbage and he'd replace it 10 times, and I'd be spending.
Oh, what I mean by the lowest price in that, let me clarify. I mean the lowest price for what the quality, the best deal is really what I'm saying. I'm not necessarily meaning the lowest price. Like you might buy an object that's a little bit more expensive knowing that it'll last longer. So technically it's still the lowest price because you won't have to buy it again.
There's a bit of that, but also even beyond that, though, it's also like I'm looking at doing work on the house, and I've got a quote from one larger company that quoted me, a price that's probably about 80% of what the people I'm going to go with are, just because. And there it's like, I like that it's a more local responsive thing, but also it's like I'm dealing with single people, and like, people who just own their own very small companies as opposed to a bigger conglomerate. So I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like I don't necessarily always agree that people always go for the lowest price. I feel like that's I don't know, that's one of those things where I think that
Like I
reducing
said,
everyone down to
I think the
economics.
better. I think it's fair. Like I said, it's more fair to say the old Rothbardian argument of they go for the best value, where they
Sure.
perceive the biggest value.
Yeah, it also
And
goes.
I think it's the same with workers. And this is kind of what, if you go and you look back, a lot of the history behind minimum wage fights is actually extremely racist. Because like at one point, like I might need to stop saying like, but at one point, um, right after the slaves were freed, the slaves, they weren't looked at as equals, and it was really fucked up. Don't get me wrong, but because they weren't looked at as equals to get into the workforce, they took a lower wage, right? Because people wouldn't pay what they would pay for a white worker.
Mhm.
But after a while, like that was what the first big thing was it was kind of they took our jobs, very similar to the right wing argument against immigration currently.
Yeah.
And they were saying they wanted the minimum wage raised because they knew at $3 no one would hire black people.
That's
They would only hire whites.
sure.
And that was kind of what it ends up doing, is it prices out the disadvantage from the marketplace rather than raising their wage. And I think that is a, like I said, it's an unfortunate
I could see that.
situation, but
I think though is like the thing is, and there's a lot of things, and it goes back almost to like the man of their times thing. Not necessarily saying that isn't wrong, but I'm also wondering if we've I'd have to say that I think that we've really moved past that, where it's like it's not
yeah,
necessarily.
not necessarily, yes, in that result, but like if you go and you look when they raised it from 675 to 725, I think it was half of African American workers lost their jobs. I think that was the statistic I looked at. I'll have to look into it and send it to you. But I know when they raised it from 675 to 725, the population got a lot. The working population got a lot older. People came out of retirement, and a lot of the younger people had issues getting jobs.
Mhm.
So, like a lot of things that a lot of people don't think about too in a lot of this minimum wage is most people that get paid minimum wage in a lot of these jobs. And this isn't saying, oh, because trust me, I've been at jobs where I've worked for 2 years at minimum wage. But most jobs, it's just a training pay situation where you get paid that for the first week while they're checking you out, and then you get paid more.
Sure.
So like it makes it worth it when you're a young kid. It makes it worth it if I can have you around for $5 for a week and then switch you up to 15 if I know you're worth it, and get rid of you if I don't. But it might not worth it. It's not worth that anymore when it's like $7, $8. Now instead, I'm going to get somebody that has experience on the resume and put him at 725 for a couple of weeks, then put him at 15.
Well,
You see what I'm saying? So you end up pricing out the younger kids. You end up pricing out a lot of people that people would consider quote unquote ghetto. You know what I'm saying? And have those ethnic names. It ends up making it a lot harder for them to get their foot in the door. And I think that's again, it's an unintended consequence. I don't think that anybody is wanting that. I think everybody who's supporting $15 minimum wage, they just want all the people who are at 725 or low, or between 725 and 15 to be at 15. But I think what you end up doing is you end up knocking off all those bottom rungs off the ladder. so no one else can come back behind them and get up the ladder. And this is something that's been, if you go through the history of our economic situation, that's really what's going on. The old saying you can see in memes is, boomers walk through the door and close the door behind them. They're the ones that own the homes. They're the ones that own the, you know what I mean, have almost no debt. Went to college on $25,000 total.
But you're essentially, I'm just trying to parse this out. You're saying essentially that with minimum wage raises like that it should reduce employment.
Not necessarily. And that's kind of the thing is that's what a lot of people kind of argue is like they're saying it reduces employment. It's not necessarily. It might happen across different. There is a certain amount of employees that just can't be replaced. You know what I mean? At a certain point, you just have to have those guys in there, or you just close the business.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? There's a certain amount. It's hard to tell what that amount is, the labor that you always need to even keep the doors open, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Right. So like at a certain point, like they can fire some people in your film crew, but they still need a guy to run the camera. They still need a guy to run the editing. They still need a guy. Like they need at least one guy there. They need at least this. Right. And that'll always exist. And that's true. Right. But the thing about it is what ends up happening is it usually ends up replaced. So it's the people that's kind of where the another big meme that runs around. It's like I want 19 years experience for you to be a server at my restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where that comes in.
But so it sounds like you're kind of making the argument though that it would drive unemployment up if the wage went up because there'd be no
unemployment in certain groups. That's what I'm trying to explain. Like, okay, and you can look at those numbers. Youth unemployment has gone up with the minimum wage. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's not that they're not hiring anyone; it's that they're not hiring young people.
Okay, and
as that's happening across the board, right? That's where you're seeing like people getting out of college and working at Starbucks because I want the guy that has the college degree and 6 years experience, and then the college degree goes to Starbucks. And then they can hire the guy with a college degree rather than the guy that's 15 trying to get a work experience on his resume. You see what I'm saying? It trickles down the line, but it's not that people aren't getting hired at all. It's more of an underemployment situation. And
but underemployment.
I said, you can look at that. That's rampant.
I don't know that it is though, and I'm pretty sure they've done studies with most of the minimum wage things and found that any issues with employment have been negligible so far as like generally the workforce remains roughly the same.
Right, it's the same amount of people, but it's not the same groups of people.
I think it's also consistent across the board. Like there's no real dip in youth, elderly, whatnot.
I'll have to send you those because I'm telling you, that's one I've looked into quite deeply.
All right.
Because, like I said, that's at a certain point, you have to have a certain amount of people to keep a business running. And like I said, and instead of getting 2 or 3 guys that can work at a certain amount of productivity, you get one guy that can work at the 3 guys' productivity. And at that point, you're paying him. You can pay him the same amount because there's a big pool to pull from because there's all these people with college degrees that can't get the job in their field. So it's like I said, it really does end up to where it's a vicious circle. And like I said, I can send you statistics. You know what I mean? And it's something that our generation has been screaming about. It's all over every meme.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, it's an issue, but there was it I think it was the Card & Kruger study was back in like the 90s with I think the Clinton price hikes. I think they've also done a lot of studies in Seattle more recently that have shown that it hasn't really had much of an impact. But I don't know. We could go back and forth, and I don't think we either of us are really equipped to dive into the case studies and
Yeah, this
definitively
is one of
prove
those things that you'd have to sit here and rip out the statistics all day, and
yeah, we'd need to
be kind of
prep this
boring
beforehand.
anyway.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess going back to the original thing though, it's like I think again the key difference I think comes down to essentially, like, for me it comes down to reform and I guess practicality of how we actually get stuff done, versus with you coming out from oftentimes a more ideological principled stance, where like you have your principles that you won't compromise on no matter what, whereas I tend to be more like, okay, well, how do we make this thing happen, and we'll maybe like maybe play a little bit looser with principles, to achieve something.
Right, and I understand that impulse, but I think the problem that comes from the old adage is if you stand for if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And I feel
But
like
for a quick second though, I'm not necessarily saying that there's no principles there. I'm just saying that it's principles that are a little bit more flexible.
right, and I get what you're saying, but like I said, that's kind of where it is, in my opinion. Like everyone that's ever been on the verge of any atrocity has said that they're either bending the principles or violating the principles for good purpose. And that's kind of the argument I'm saying is like, history is going to be a judge, and the only way we'll know after the fact, or there's no way we know at the time, right? So, in my opinion, if you go into force and you end up being wrong, the consequences are, grave. Whereas if you don't go into force and you end up being right, usually you win. The old Victor Hugo quote, nothing can stop an idea whose time has come. And that's not to say that I don't believe in force and self-defense. Oh, obviously I do. If you have a situation where someone is acting in force, then I do believe that you have a right to quell force within that specific situation. And it's kind of the argument I said with riots and all of that. It's like you have a right, if somebody is rioting, you have a right to stop that one guy, but you don't have a right to pepper spray the whole crowd. The guys marching have nothing to do with the guy breaking the window. And that's kind of the thing about it is in my opinion, that's the whole issue. And we could probably go into this one. I know you might find this one fun. It's why I have an issue with the idea of the paradox of tolerance, because I think that the paradox of tolerance has an issue with conflation of action and speech, right? Whereas, like I said, it's like when someone acts intolerantly, of course we should not tolerate that. You know what I mean? If someone goes and does something
really quickly though, what would those acts look like? Like where is the actual line?
Like I said, the line is force.
Okay, but
if you are using force on another person, that is
what exactly do you qualify as force? That's like, I mean, we're talking about big concepts, and it's I guess I'm wondering like what the actual thing is. Like, is it force, say, if your employer is relying on economic circumstances to keep you working? That would be, to me, a form of force that could justify a forceful reaction that might be rather violent. It's sort of the weird gray area in between, and that's sort of where I see like that's essentially where I see like principles being more flexible coming in handy. And
well, I see the initiation of force is quite simple. You know what I mean? People who are, like I said, the people who broke into the Capitol, that's force. The people who were just standing outside protesting, that's not force. You know what I mean? It's very simple to figure this out. You know what I mean? It's the guy that wants to shout the N-word is one guy, and the guy that wants to drag people behind his truck is another. And like I said, those are the people that we need to be focused on and make sure they know that they will get prosecuted fullest extent of the law, and that like people are not going to be cool with it.
But the thing is, it's like though you're bringing up the example of people say dragging someone behind a truck. And you're saying that they're different from the person who's just using racial slurs. The thing is that that person who ended up dragging someone behind their truck was using racial slurs.
Right, but the person using racial slurs isn't always dragging people behind the truck. It's kind of the argument of the gateway drug with marijuana. It's like everybody who does heroin smoked marijuana first, right? And they also ate a French fry before they ever did heroin too. French fries don't cause you to use heroin. It's just the most common drug. So like I said, like of course the racist guy is doing that. But I think there's a large thing that a lot of people don't want to admit to. And it's like at one point when we were kids, I don't know about you, but I know at least when I was a kid, the thing that pissed off our parents, the biggest thing that you could do was make fun of religion and use extreme, loud, vulgar language all the time. So what did we do when we got on the internet? We made fun of Jesus and we used loud, vulgar language all the time, right? Now the generation that's in charge is becoming the millennials. And what is the most offensive thing that you can say to get them to lose their mind? A lot of it's that. And it's really, I really do think that's it. Because it's become just like the same thing. Like they react the same way. Blasphemy. You know what I mean? It's just, I think there's a lot of that to get a reaction. Now, that's not to say that there aren't racist motherfuckers out there that deserve to be buried under the jail. That is not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that there are people who say it because they think it's funny. That doesn't make it okay. That doesn't mean it's good. That doesn't mean it's something that should be quote unquote defended. But it's the point of the matter is it's something that needs to be addressed in a completely different way than the guy who wants, like I said, the guy who wants to actually drag people behind his truck, burn a cross in someone's yard. That guy is a completely different guy than the guy who's just trying to piss off his parents.
Well, then again, so I mean, you even brought up there, like somebody bringing a cross in the yard. That isn't necessarily force, at least not in the same.
Yes, it is. It's trespassing, vandalism, arson.
Okay, I mean,
there's a lot of force involved in that. You want to burn a cross in your yard, that's okay. But you can't go on somebody else's property and trespass, erect a cross, and then burn it.
But see, it's
kind of the same thing with flag burning. It's like, I'm totally cool with burning a flag. You want to burn an LGBTQ flag? You want to burn a U.S. flag? Go for it. Burn your flag. Don't crawl up at the top of somebody's pole, steal their flag, and burn it. Burn your flag.
I think the thing is that there's the messaging there, and the thing is, for me at least, it's you're saying that you need to wait for if you have a bunch of people say burning rainbow flags because they disagree, and it's their flags that they buy that they do on their own private property with their own private group of people. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be allowed to, but I'm saying that there should be a response because those people...
and yeah, like I'm not opposed to freedom of speech coming out and saying, hey, that's a big issue, you should do it. But that's kind of my point is it goes back to the non-aggression principle. It's like if somebody is using speech and that is the issue, then the solution is more speech. If someone is using force and that is the issue, then the solution is force.
I see speech, though, that can be aggressive and can also telegraph worse things. And the problem is like when they go out and they drag someone behind their truck after doing this for a while, and it's already too late. They've already killed somebody. You can't fix that. And for me at least, I'm sitting there. I'm like, they were they were doing these little parties on their thing, and I was telling you, and like and that's where I'm
right. But at the same time, you can't. This isn't Minority Report. We can't prosecute future crimes. You know what I mean? And at the same time, it's like I'm not disagreeing with you that I would rather be able to prevent any death that I can prevent. Of course, obviously, I feel that way. But I also don't want to put people in jail because they might kill somebody.
That's also the thing is like I'm also not talking about prosecuting people for crimes that they haven't committed. I'm talking about, I don't know, I see that dude in the face and he gets, he gets knocked, he just gets punched in the face. I see that as a valid response to that kind of thing, and something that we probably need a little bit more of. We need people
Well, like
who
there was
say,
to give an example, there was a Trump rally, right, and some Bernie Sanders supporters showed up, right, and one of them put a Klan hood on midway through the rally, and one of the black Trump supporters stood up and punched him square in the face, right?
okay,
Now, obviously, like, you're wearing a Klan hood, dude. Like, that's not cool, right? Punched him square in the face. Walked up to the cop, put his hands behind his back, and knew exactly what it is. Now, I'm not saying I think he should be prosecuted for assault, but I'm also saying I don't have any sympathy for the guy that got punched in his face that thought it was a funny joke to wear a Klan hood.
Same thing with, like,
you know what I'm saying? I'm not
Richard,
sorry for that guy. And
Richard
that's also
Spencer.
why I also believe in judicial, I do believe in, jury nullification for situations like that. So you come before a judge and jury, and the jury's like, yeah, this is legally, he did actually assault a guy, but I mean, I ain't mad at him, so he's not guilty. And we should have that.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, I think like,
and that's kind of my point. But at the same time, it's kind of the same thing I've said with, like, if you're the president and you sign off on a drone and the drone kills somebody innocent, you should go to trial for it. You should have to sit there and defend that, A, I killed an innocent man. And if it's okay and it's understandable, then you will go free. But if it's not, like I said, I think people should have a lot more accountability when they're holding people's lives in their hands.
Sure, but let's
like, also, honestly, I think it's kind of ridiculous that a police officer can fire randomly into a house, whereas if I was to do that same thing, it's something I was thinking about the other day. It's like I was outside, right, and it just sitting on my porch, and I heard a gunshot. And it's like, if I was a cop and I was just fling my gun around and just start firing and hit a kid, right, then I would be totally fine. Like, I would just be, well, okay, I heard a gunshot, I've started firing, it's not my fault, and I'd get away with it. But me as a gun owner, if I were to turn and start firing because I heard a gunshot and hit a kid, I'm going to prison. And rightfully so. You should verify your target before you start firing a gun at it.
I don't necessarily disagree, but also, look, I'm not.
You should have a higher responsibility as the state, as the person who is enforcing the law and the person who makes the law, not person, but persons. You should have a higher responsibility to the law than we do. Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing I've preached before, back and forth with me and you in the mod group, with why I think that we should be a little bit better as much as we can. Obviously, we're not perfect, but we should strive to be a better example of the rules than even the other members in the group, because we are the ones enforcing the rules. So it looks hypocritical if we're running around breaking them. You know, and like I said, we should be an example of how to do it. Not an example of how not to do it.
I mean, I tend to think that we actually are that example, but
right. And I'm not saying that we aren't. I'm just saying generally that's something that we should strive for. Something that I've brought up a few times.
But also, there's a few issues that came up there that you brought up. One was pointing out just the people who make the laws are not the people who enforce them. That's correct. One divide. So that's another issue where
correct.
There's a disconnect there, and that's where a lot of the bad can happen.
Correct.
Also, I mean, like, let's just be honest here. Like, I think that to prosecute people to the extent that you're saying, mostly to me sounds like it's just a way to gum up the works of government and slow things to a halt. Well,
to an extent, you also have to realize that if that was, a lot of what I'm saying when I say it is in an ideal world. Now, of course, good can't be the enemy of perfect, right? So if of course I would work towards that any way I could. But I'm not saying that that's how we would start, because to do that, we would also have to ungum the works with all these drug laws, ungum the works with all these nonviolent offenders, ungum the works with, you know what I mean, with extensive sentencing that we're giving to certain people for really weird crimes. You know what I mean? That, like, why are you getting 10 years for possession of marijuana? Just an example. It's stuff like that. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I think would ungum the works to make this possible, to keep people accountable for the laws that we actually care about, like murder and rape and theft.
I think though, and I think that this is actually kind of a good place to maybe point out where that sometimes the breakdown between where we might agree and where we might butt heads comes to a head. Is like I feel like oftentimes, especially with people who are more in the libertarian side of things, they tend to go from like 0 to 100 very, very quick. Like, I would gladly accept if that I would stand side by side with people to repeal drug laws, be them libertarian, be them whatever. The thing is that, like, I can almost guarantee that if I'm protesting drug laws, all of a sudden libertarians in the group are, next thing you know, going to start like talking about taxation as theft and the NAP and all these things that I see issues with. I understand where they come from. I respect it, their beliefs and whatnot, but it's also like, dude, we're here to let's focus on repealing these drug laws, as opposed to going full bore on your entire like libertarian dream.
Right. Well, this is something that I've kind of said, to an extent. It's fair, in my opinion. A lot of times they show up to those events because it's also good places to recruit people who are like-minded in libertarianism. So, like, that's part of why they're going off on that tangent. Is it's like, hey, we want to know. Let's know if you believe along these lines, you do have a place to be. You're not, a crazy Democrat or crazy Republican. You're a regular libertarian. But you know what I mean? And I think that's a fair. I think that's fair to do that. And I think that we also have to realize that I think the libertarians in the group need to be able to go, hey, look, this guy's a communist, but I don't really give a flying F. Or this guy's a liberal, and I don't really give a flying F, because we're about to get this drug legalized. You know what I mean? I'm not going to sit here and talk his ear off and try to convert him. I'm just here to see if anybody's already there. And if not, let's get this done. Because I think that, recruitment should be second to getting the solutions to our problems, obviously. So it's like, I think that
usually comes first, I guess, is the thing, is like they come like it's they can't
which is understandable when you're like 10%, man. Like, if you're a Democrat, you're like, why are you always recruiting? Yeah, because you're already 50%, man. Like, you can't get mad at them for going.
also that's like I don't know,
or 30% or something. I don't know, but yeah.
It's also, there's though very strange to like then like bring like the hey, let's break the duopoly or whatever that talking point is, because if you go to a weed legalization rally, you're probably not going to find a lot of like really strong like Democrats or Republicans. I'm sure that upwards of half the people there are probably going to self-describe as independent.
Right.
It's like, I myself, like, I mean, there's a weird thing in America where a lot of people describe themselves as independent, but vote along party lines, whatever that party may be. I mean, for myself, I have mostly voted Democrat throughout my entire life. Like, that's, it's always been the clearest path towards things that I want to see done. I have a lot of those serious issues with the Democratic Party, and I can't really say that I necessarily support them. I like very begrudgingly usually because they're not as bad as the other people running, including libertarians and the Green Party, who I've voted for before and have regretted. So it's just like it's I don't know, it's just a weird thing. I think I'm off in a tangent. I forgot what my point really was, but yeah, it's just like, I don't know, like I think there's a lot of coalition building that can be done if you focus on the issues at hand as opposed to going wider. And I get the need to recruit, but it's like, it would probably be a lot more effective and would be in a much better place if we could just kind of focus on the job we got to do.
Right, and that's something I've argued many times about, like, bottom unity. This is why I kind of tell communists and libertarians, like the real deal stateless guys, like, hey, we need to stop fighting and talking about throwing each other out of helicopters and guillotining each other when, like, literally, let's be honest here. Whether it be the authoritarian left or the authoritarian right, they usually use us to gain power and then kill us.
Sure.
Let's be honest. So, like, if you're going to ally with anybody, let's ally with the guys that say, hey, you can have your commune over there and I'm going to do my city over here. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's totally fine. That would be my message to those guys. That's kind of where I argue there. It's like, any way that we can get to anywhere, I think we should ally together. You know what I mean? I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, or Libertarian. If you're anti-war, let's get that done. You know what I mean? I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, or Libertarian. If you're anti-drug laws, let's get that done. You know what I mean? I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, or Libertarian. I care if you're wanting to do some criminal justice reform. And that's kind of why I see people like, Tulsi as like somebody that you could work with. You know what I mean? Because she wants to get the anti-war. She wants to get that. It's like, yeah, I don't agree with her on everything, but I see a handful of things that we could do together, if that makes sense. The same thing, anybody, it doesn't matter who it is, but I think a lot of the issue with the Democratic Party I see currently is the fact that the establishment seems to be a little bit more entrenched. Like it's the same reason why we get like Hillary Clinton. It's the same reason why we have Joe Biden. We have Kamala Harris. Amy Klobuchar was a big one. Elizabeth Warren. These are all people who have been. And I'm not saying establishment as in they all agree on the same exact issue. That's not what I mean. I mean it's people who have been in politics for decades. You know what I mean? And not only have they been in politics for decades, they've been actually doing things. So that's why I wouldn't give Bernie Sanders that, because I would say that Bernie Sanders and I'm not giving that to him in a bad way that he's not doing things. I'm giving that to him in a positive, in that the things that he does, he's doing along his ideological lines. So that ends up with him not siding with the Democrats just no matter what, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what I'm saying is if you look at a Warren, she might not agree with them, but she'll still put her name behind whatever the Democrats tell her to put. That's what I mean by establishment. The people who will vote along party lines no matter what. That's the reason why I wouldn't put like the quote unquote squad in the establishment, because they'll break off from the party lines. You know what I mean? And like I said, on the Republican side, there's a lot of those types too, like old Mitch, and a lot of those guys that just vote no matter what, the same thing.
Yeah, but I think also like with the squad, I think they do end up falling in line a lot, especially like when it comes down to like actual party line votes.
More than I'd want to, but I have seen them go rogue when it's really screwing a lot of people. So that's why, like I said, I would give them the credit on that. I really loved when AOC came out on, I can't remember which bill it was, but she was literally like, they gave us this bill and gave us like 4 hours to read it, and it's like 3,000 pages long. You know what I mean? And they expect a vote. I'm voting against it because this is way too long for me to read. And it's like, yeah, like this is ridiculous. You shouldn't be, like, we set up the country on like 12 pages.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, the only reason this bill is this long is because you're trying to hide stuff. We know what you're doing.
Sure. I mean, I don't know. Like, again,
I'm not saying that in some points it takes a little bit more complex law to solve a certain situation. That's obvious. But most of the time when it's 2,000 pages, it's because there's one page of the law and 1,999 pages of corporate giveaways.
I think there's also there you're not necessarily wrong, but I also do think that also a lot of tinier projects do get tacked on that way, and I see that there is some advantage to pork that actually can get stuff done that needs to be done, and it could be even it's just it's really
like I'm not necessarily against like what would be considered pork. It's like if you were to want to build like an opera house and like that's what you wanted to do, I'm not opposed to you building the opera house. I just don't think it has anything to do with this stimulus package. So pass the opera house bill. You know what I mean? So that's kind of my thing is that's kind of the issue is like for me is a lot of times it's tacked on in a way that it's kind of it holds the other thing hostage to where you have to agree to that. And I think that's not meant to be the way that this is supposed to work. It's not supposed to hold one issue hostage to get another thing done. I think we should do it issue by issue by issue.
But again, I sound that seems like the sort of thing that would just gum up the works and bring things to a halt. Like, I mean, every single opera house bill or every single bill to like, improve a highway or build a library.
I don't think it would bring it to the halt because, like I said, if it's a page and a half to read, it's a quick, easy yes or no. You know what I'm saying? I think what brings it to a halt is thinking that thinking that I have to sit here for a month and read this bill. That brings things to a halt.
It's a quick yes or no,
but and then having to do an amendment process, remove all the things that you hate.
But I mean, you realize that every vote is a whole process where you have to get over 500 people to vote one way or the other on it, and that
right.
Just getting 500 people vote, that's like usually most of the times that I see it, it takes about 20 minutes. So as opposed to doing 20-minute vote for a 2,000 thing, you want to do 2,000 20-minute votes, which is where I'm saying like it.
Again, I don't necessarily think. I think, like I said, I think a lot of times they're having to thumb through and recall. Like if you're reading, that's all you're doing is that job. You're reading bill after bill after bill after bill after bill. You're like, okay, is this the one that had? Okay, that's this one. You know what I mean? I can see why that can take a 20-minute, thumb through real quick. But I don't see how a one page is taking 20 minutes.
I'm not talking about thumbing through and reading the bill. I'm talking about the actual process of voting. It takes about 20 minutes to tally up all those votes. So if you do it once for a 2,000-page bill, it's much quicker than doing it 2,000 times. Because
sounds like again, this is something that I go back and forth with my dad on is modern problems require modern solutions. We put up a poll on Facebook and we can get way more votes in 20 minutes. You know what I mean? Like if you're like, and I'm not saying that we should do it all through Facebook polls. I'm making the point of we have the technology to do the tally a lot quicker than we do the tally.
I think that they already do tally it pretty quick. I believe that they all vote at their desk and it's a push button. It still takes time.
Right. Well, like I said, the only reason I can see how a push button to tally takes longer than 20 minutes, like I said, is if you have some outdated technology, and I wouldn't doubt that to be the case. It's a lot of times the case.
I don't know it's necessarily a technological solution. I think it's just sort of the way that the voting process needs to happen. And I think that's also why, like, you get things tacked on the bills. I mean, maybe.
But at the same time, I mean, also, like, inefficiency is a feature, not a bug, of the system. There's a reason that, like, stuff is supposed to be considered and take a while to think about, and you know what I mean. And that's kind of the thing about it. About it is like, you're supposed to be considering this. It's supposed to be hard to get bills passed. It's supposed to be hard to get this stuff done because you're making decisions for 300 million people. This is kind of the downside of like when it's not hard. Like, let's talk about when it's not hard. Look at the Supreme Court. and we get Roe v. Wade overturned. It's only 9 people, so it's not that hard to come to an agreement one way or the other. And it's like, yeah, but what you end up with is a rule now being set for millions of people, 300 million people. You know what I mean? And it should have been a slower process. It should have been something that takes more consideration. You overturned a law that's been around for decades.
It was a slow process. I mean, the memo was leaked months in advance before it finally came out. I'm sure there was lots of
right, but
and also
but the decision
let's not
wasn't that slow of a process.
Sure, I mean it took it
when they decided to publicly release it for PR sake.
But this is
different.
But again,
they wanted to release it right before they went on break, so they didn't have to worry about dealing with the fallout. That was a PR move rather than we don't have the paperwork ready or anything. That's why it leaked, because it was already ready. They just was waiting till it was right. It was right before they left session, so they didn't have to deal with it.
I think it was probably a more deliberate leak where somebody saw it and fundamentally disagreed about
I don't doubt at all that somebody deliberately leaked it. Yeah.
Also, though, let's like look at, but I mean, you seem to be saying that the process of overturning Roe versus Wade was quick, but it took a concerted effort over decades, basically from the very beginning of Roe versus Wade, of an entire movement being built up dedicated to overturning that decision.
Well, no, that's not necessarily what I mean, though. Like,
but also,
you never had near the votes, right? And how did you get the votes? One president.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? That's all it took was one president that got the votes. I'm sorry, I had to stand up, stretch.
That's all right. But yeah,
but all it took was one president to get the votes to make that happen. You know what I mean? And so
then you're still looking though at a 5-year process from that to here, like getting the extra justices appointed. I mean, George Bush.
But really, the big point being is like not even necessarily that. Of course, there's a long process to getting a congressman elected or a president elected. You have all the the voting and all that, but that's not really the point I'm kind of getting at. I'm kind of getting at that, like, efficiency isn't necessarily a good thing. Sometimes it's good to have a bunch of people that have to actually debate it and argue it out. And it's better when there's more people in the room than when there's less. That's kind of the argument. And this is the same argument why I think there should be more congressmen. I think there should be one for every 30,000, not every 700,000.
I don't necessarily disagree. I just see the advantage of pork being that it allows the actual physical process of taking a vote and tallying it and doing whatever official stuff they need to do on their end to verify that. Doing that once and covering a lot of things is better than doing it a bunch of times to cover things one at a time. Especially like, say, like you said, the opera house type example. It's like, it seems frivolous, but it's a good example. It's like, hey, you want to like promote arts in whatever town you're from. I'll vote for your bill, but I want to get, I'll have a little piece of money to go towards this opera house project we got going on. I get the utility. I think it's probably a better way to do some good as opposed to passing a specific opera house bill where everybody has to debate back and forth one way or another. Next thing you know, you're like being like, okay, well, you just end up getting too many cooks in the kitchen. Everybody carves out a little bit, and next thing you know, you have pretty much nothing, and you don't actually get to do much of anything.
Which I wouldn't be opposed to anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously, you get to less taxes and whatever. But I think that's the other thing though, and I think the thing that frustrates a lot of people with the small government crowd is that it's almost, I don't know if disingenuous is the right word, but it just, the whole like we want a government small enough they can drown in the bathtub. it's this stated goal that's out in the open that everybody kind of knows they're doing, but I don't know, they tend to still try to be sneaky about it. I think that just really, I think it's really off-putting for
I don't think there's anything sneaky about announcing what you're doing and then trying to do it. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of like,
I guess I'm trying to figure it out. It's like I don't know. It's like say like libraries. Like libraries are a great benefit to a lot of people, and
agreed.
but in pursuit of lower taxes, a lot of more libertarian and small government minded people would try to do away with those, but I don't know. They just never tend to come out and say like, oh yeah, we need to get rid of libraries. It's just like, yeah, we should just lower taxes, and I'm sure somebody will donate to, and we'll get libraries. It's like, yeah, nobody's really going to donate, and you're just looking for lower taxes and don't care if the library goes away. And I think it's like, I don't know. I think that's the way to try to argue around what the obvious outcome will be, that I think turns people off.
I think the issue is from the other side is it's a lack of understanding of. It's not that we want the library to go away, it's that we want the wars and the other things to go away. It's, if the funding was voluntary, we think the library would be funded, but the wars would not. We think that what people want would be the things that get funded, and what people don't want would not be the things that get funded. And that's the argument. And that's kind of again, it goes back to, it seems like there's some people who, like, it seems like the quote unquote, I guess the best way to put it is a pro-tax, but it's not pretty much anybody's anti-tax. Nobody wants to pay them. But the point being is like, it seems like the acceptance is that you'll pay your tax that you're forced to pay, and know that you're paying for something that the other side wants, knowing that they'll be forced to pay for what you want too. But I think a better solution, and then add on to that you also have a big person, you have somebody dipping out of it. And so really only 20% goes to what you want. This is the reason why the left doesn't have the health care they want. They don't have, a lot of these other things that they would want. And I think if the people who are really for universal health care all put in, half of the money that was taken from them in taxes currently, if it was just given to them and they put half the money, they would have the universal health care. You know what I mean? And that's kind of the point.
But how? I mean, that does,
because it's like, think about it. A third of our budget is spent on our military. A third. That's a third of your taxes.
Sure.
Would you spend that voluntarily?
No, but
okay, that's kind of the point.
Here's the thing, though.
Department of Defense is the largest polluter in the world.
I get that, but here's the thing, though, is okay, so we've gone back and forth before about my less than conventional anti-war stance, where it's not very anti-war right now, mostly because I look at the situation over there and I see a situation where we leave being something where we prioritize American lives over other lives, and leave a huge humanitarian crisis, which I feel like we would be responsible for if we would just leave. And so, but where I'm going with this, though, is you're saying that nobody would vote to continue those wars, and that's true, and that's problematic. Even more problematic, though, is that people really didn't have that much of an issue voting for those wars back when we started them. It's like,
right, and that's kind of the point, and that's exactly the issue. If, like, right after 9/11, if George W. Bush came and asked us for the money to go after Osama bin Laden, we probably would have all given to it, right? But 2-3 years later, when we realized it wasn't about Osama bin Laden anymore, that money would have got cut off.
I don't.
That's exactly my point.
That's the thing is I don't think it would have. There was a lot of support for the Iraq invasion as well.
And right,
A lot of
like I said, while there's support, they will get money. When there's not, they will not. That's the reason why, if you go and you look, right, like Afghanistan was the longest war in U.S. history.
Sure, but
back in the day, they didn't have a credit card to run up and go and fight all over the place. So whenever they had a war, they had to try to keep it as short as possible because the American people were paying for it. And I can even show you cartoons from World War II where they were putting out propaganda begging people to send in their taxes so they could continue to fight World War II, because they used to have to beg for this money.
Okay, but the thing is, so like I said, people would have voted. There was the support for both those wars. There's also now not that support to continue them. And
like I said, we fought World War II off of them begging for money because we felt it was worth it.
Sure, but the thing is, though, is like what I'm saying is like I am not okay with us creating a humanitarian crisis and walking away from it because public sentiment here has changed.
Right. I mean, like I said, again, the funding to create the humanitarian crisis would have never existed.
No, but it would have, because those two wars that created this crisis were incredibly popular when they kicked off. There was a lot of popular support for those. And
for what wars?
Iraq and Afghanistan, the entire war on terror.
Correct. But like I said, if you go and you look back, at first that support was there and that support waned.
But you're hearing what I'm saying.
And if there was an issue with the humanitarian crisis, then the support for the humanitarian crisis would have overtaken it, and then money would have been sent in a different way. Rather than bombs.
I think though you're missing, like, going in there is what created the humanitarian crisis. Simply leaving will exacerbate it and make it worse than it is. We have created the conditions.
Right, and like I said, a lot of it too is, again, but if you really want to put this down, at the root of this crisis was being lied to by the state.
Sure.
So like I said, again, like.
But that happened.
The problem is government. It's not solved by more government. Even the problem then, they were like, oh, well, we need to gather more intel, and that's how we'll know. No, they had all the intel. Like, you can look at the 9/11 Commission report. They had all the intel before it happened. They were getting warned by the FBI. This guy didn't make any sense. One of the pilots literally went to a flight school and said, I don't care about learning to land.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they were already getting reported. It wasn't a needle in a haystack. It wasn't even. They had the information before the thing happened.
I mean, it's
right, but at the same time, they still weren't able to act because why? They get all this other information. So what did they do? They expanded how much information they're getting. So it's like one of those situations where it's like the problem causes the next problem, causes the next problem, and it just keeps exacerbating itself.
Yeah, I mean that's it. But the thing is that we're already stuck in a pretty serious situation with a lot of lives on the line, and I think that I just, me personally, like, morally,
and like I said, I'm not saying that nothing should be done for these people, but I do think you shouldn't have guns on the ground shooting at these people, specifically because I think it's time to end the war. If you're there for humanitarian reasons, then do humanitarian things.
The thing is, though, is like the humanitarian
shooting people is not a humanitarian mission.
But like war, I think so.
It's a war. It's a conflict.
No, it's a conflict, and the conflict is messy, and there are people on the ground who are taking advantage of that and looking to, again, look at Afghanistan. We pulled out, and it's awful there.
Right, the puppet left the hand, and the government left, or the hand left the puppet, and the government fell down. It was a puppet regime from the U.S. The second the hand left the puppet, the Taliban took it right back over.
I wouldn't say it's a puppet.
They let them walk right in.
It was a.
It was over in 48 hours. Nobody died.
Pretty sure lots of people
If
died.
anybody died, it was very, very few people. It was almost bloodless revolution if it wasn't a bloodless revolution.
I'd have to.
That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen in a government that's formed through the consent of the governed.
I'm pretty
Even
sure
partially formed through the consent of the governed.
there was no consent of the governed with the Taliban takeover, and there was a lot of death.
There was no consent of the governed for that government. They took all the money and left the second the U.S. left.
Wait, which?
They weren't there. They weren't there for their people. They were there for themselves. The second the U.S. left, they got into a plane, the government, and left.
You're talking about the.
Now, people might have rose up after that and had an issue with the Taliban in general being in charge. I'm sure they did. But the point of the matter is from the actual old government, there wasn't any actual fighting. There was a revolution that might have popped off afterward, yes. But from the actual Afghan government, they left. He hopped in a plane and left.
Oh, so I think I'm trying. I feel like we're going at this from too many different angles. The Taliban killed a lot of people.
Okay. I don't disagree with that.
It wasn't a bloodless revolution. Like there was no like the U.S. left. The government that we had set up left. The government we had set up was, I wouldn't call it a puppet government, but it was definitely very weak and not well suited to actually govern the country. And basically, when they lost our support, it fell immediately, and it caused a lot of death and destruction, and a lot of really terrible things that are happening to this day. And I feel, even personally, because as just a citizen of this country, that it's partially my responsibility, and I am not okay with that. That said, I was out in the streets protesting, even going there back in 2001, 2002. Like, I didn't want to go there. I didn't see the point. But once we got there and I started hearing what the reality of the ground was, I was sort of like, okay, well, hey, there's some serious issues, and they're going to get worse if we left, as sadly was proven correct last year. And that's sort of, I don't know, I think again, that's like one of those things where it comes down to principles. It's like, I'm against war, but I also saw that we had gone into a war that I, was against, and created a situation that kind of necessitated us staying within the war.
So in 2001, you were against us going into Afghanistan.
Yes.
But we had already created a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan in 2001. We've been there since the 80s, bombing the shit out of them.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing about it is it was a bad idea then, but now that we've bombed the shit out of them for another 20 years, it's a good idea now.
We took a much more active role, and I don't know, we did some stuff in the 80s. It wasn't nearly on the same level.
I mean, that's literally, you can go and look, it's what Osama bin Laden cited as his reason for hitting the Twin Towers, was because we were bombing the shit out of the Middle East.
Are we talking about Afghanistan or the Middle East?
I mean, generally the Middle East, but he was from Afghanistan. That's where he lived. He was an oil guy in Afghanistan, and he was actually building the U.S. military bases. His family built U.S. military bases for
I'm familiar.
For the U.S. In Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia was the big mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, and that's what came out in the old 28 pages that got swept under the rug.
Don't know about that, but okay. But so
I'll send it to you.
But we're going on with the like I said, Afghanistan. We weren't actively involved there to the same extent, and I was against going in. But like I said, once we went in, we created a situation where leaving would have made things worse. And that's essentially why I am not for I'm not necessarily for ending these wars. I think we should shift our focus. We should focus more on nation building, which we explicitly said we weren't going to do when we went in there. And I think that we should kind of just basically focus on leaving those places better than they were when we got there. And certainly not like, bombed out shells with non-functioning governments where, the people who live there are going to be at the whims of whichever local warlord wants to roll on through and do whatever it is they want to the people who live there. That's essentially where it is. It's like I feel like we went in there unnecessarily, created a crisis, and now I feel like we're stuck there until we fix it.
Right. I just think that after so long at this point,
I shouldn't say stuck there till we fix it. I should say stuck there until it's fixed.
I just feel like at this point it'd be like asking, the Nazis at the end of the World War II, to go in and fix all these countries they bombed the shit out of. You know what I mean? At a certain point, it's like none of those people even want them there to do that. You know what I mean? And like I said, it's one of those situations. And I'm not saying that we're Nazis. Let me clarify that.
That's
I'm
fine.
saying that like we are perceived as Nazis in that area for that reason. I can show you, some of the chillingest things like little kids drawing, drones.
Yeah.
And talking about like these kids are scared, terrified when they hear our drones go by. You know what I mean? It's something that rains death on them all the time. We are the bad guy. We are the boogeyman. Nobody wants the boogeyman around to build your country. They don't trust you to.
And again, like I said, I'm not just saying that we should fix it, but I'm saying that we shouldn't leave until it's fixed. Because, as terrifying as said drones are, there's much worse that can happen.
I'm not, like I said, I'm not disagreeing with it, but I just think that people should form their own governments. And I think part of the reason why that government failed so quickly was because these people did not trust that government because they saw it as an agent of the U.S.
It fell quickly because it was weak.
Right, and that's why it's weak. That's what makes the government strong. The power comes from the consent of the governed. That's what made it weak.
I mean, in the case of a nation where everyone's impoverished, I don't know if the consent of the government is going to do very much when you have a well-resourced insurgency. On the other hand, I mean,
how did they get all those resources?
Throughout various networks.
Because a bunch of people gave them money. That's kind of my point. It's consent of the people who want them to do it. And I'm not saying that means they're the right guys. That means they're the good guys. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's why they have more power is because they have more support.
You're saying that the support isn't coming from the people that they're.
Yeah, not necessarily. A lot of times it's coming from states.
Yeah, and
I agree.
That's part of the problem, and that's sort of like, yeah, we need to find a solution before we leave, and that's, like I said, that's kind of my weird paradoxical anti-war stance. Because I mean, and hey, again, like you said, you said that so you said before Osama bin Laden attacked us because we were bombing there, and I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think that I think there was a lot of resentment in that we got involved in we used Afghanistan as a proxy war against the Soviet Union, and we trained a bunch of people
with him.
Yep, but the thing is like, but what did we do once they?
What was the plan? Let me ask you this: what was the plan with him in the proxy war with Afghanistan and the Soviet Union? What was the plan? What were they trying to do with the CIA?
Just trying to stop the Soviet Union. Trying to stop the Soviet.
They were trying to lure. They were trying to lure the Soviet Union into a war in Afghanistan that would tie up all of their money and drive them bankrupt.
Sure, but see, so The thing is, though,
Does that sound a little familiar?
The thing is, though, is however we use people like Osama bin Laden, then we
literally taught them how to do it to us.
We did, but
at the most generous interpretation of what we know.
I'm not saying that, but my point is like, do you think he would have been as upset about it and set to strike out if we had actually maybe, like, built up Afghanistan some, made it a better place? If he, like,
not really, he lives in Saudi Arabia.
I mean, he was from Saudi Arabia, but he kind of committed pretty fully to the cause.
Right. After the bombing, he moved to Afghanistan with a bunch of the Al Qaeda. But he did live, like, he was a very super wealthy guy. He was really deep with the Saudi royal family.
No, I know all that, but I'm pretty sure that he was based in Afghanistan well before.
I know he was during the Mujahideen when he was getting the Soviets involved. But I'm talking about when he actually left and went to do the trade center attacks and the all that. But yeah, like that was when he moved over there, because of course he didn't go and do any of the attacks himself. But when those started, that's when he left and went to Afghanistan, because he wanted us to target Afghanistan and not Saudi Arabia, which is also what Saudi Arabia wanted. But when when that happened, we ended up going into Iraq as well, which pissed off Saudi Arabia, which is why we're bombing the shit out of Yemen right now to placate Saudi Arabia, which is crazy because the whole war in the first place started because they paid somebody to bomb us. Well, fly planes into stuff.
Okay, I mean, again, going a bit wide-ranging here, but again, going back though, it's like I said, bin Laden he went over to Afghanistan with Mujahideen, and from my understanding, he was pretty solidly based over in Afghanistan, Pakistan, that area, for the remainder of his days. And the question being, like, basically, like, we used the Afghanis and the Mujahideen to fight a war against Russia, and then we just cut them loose. We're like, all right, well, you guys served your purpose.
All right, part of the reason he was pissed.
I think that's most of the reason he was pissed. And my question, my question
to an
extent,
he thought that U.S. was going to basically exterminate. I can't remember which one he is, Shia or Sunni, but he thought that they were going to help them take over the rest of the area. It was kind of a tit for tat that we never gave the tat to. So it's not necessarily that, like, yeah, you're right in that he probably would have never done it, but we'd have probably pissed somebody else off doing what he wanted to pay him back to where we would be in this situation. And like I said, like the Saudis, in my opinion, that's the people we really need to look at right now. And like, it's interesting too, because like generally, usually the left is with me on the Saudi Arabia is the real issue,
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of issues there. That's undoubtable.
Right. And I think that Saudi Arabia could easily be fixed by just saying, we're not helping you anymore. But the thing about that is we have to be able to figure out what we're going to do for energy, whether it be nuclear or fracking or whatever the hell we're going to do, because the oil is going to be gone when we stand up to Saudi Arabia. And that's the scary part about the whole situation, is the fact that we fought all these wars and found out that the person who attacked us is the guy we still need. So we buried that for years. That was the 28 pages. So we sat here and fought these wars forever while lying to the American people that it had to do with Afghanistan when it never had anything to do with Afghanistan.
Okay.
Which lured us into Afghanistan, which caused this humanitarian crisis that you're talking about now. But like I said, not only was Iraq a complete, misdirection, the most we should have done in Afghanistan is a police action of getting that guy, that one dude.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Going and getting that terror cell. That's the most we should have done. And past that, we should have been having some real harsh words, at least with Saudi Arabia.
Again, you're not saying anything I disagree with. Yeah, and like I said, I was saying this all 20 years ago. I was in the street exactly for those reasons. I'm just also though now like looking today at the situation on the ground, I can't justify leaving because I can't justify having a hand in whatever atrocities are going to follow.
And like I said, I'm not necessarily saying that we should leave in a capacity of just vacate and disappear. Because like I said, I do think that there's a humanitarian mission that should be still carried out. But that humanitarian missions aren't carried out by people with guns.
They are one of the people who are trying to stop you from doing the
those are conflicts, those are wars. And it's like that's kind of the point is like we're not the police for the world. And I don't think that we should be. We
shouldn't be, but we did take on that role, and I think that we need to see it through. Like half-assing it isn't an option that I can see as justified. Like, I mean, look, we put ourselves in a shitty situation. It's not at all in doubt. I just don't think that allowing awful things to happen to other people is a solution that I can get behind.
And like I said, I'm not arguing to allow anything. I'm just arguing that, like.
But so the thing is like, if we pull out our armed forces, we are allowing things. We need those armed forces there to keep these horrible things that are sure to happen from happening, because they're going to be done by other armed people who are currently fighting, and that's the base. And that's even the Yemen thing, even the stuff in Libya, like it's turned into a regional conflict. Well,
what about Somalia? Are we allowing what's going on there?
How do you mean? What exactly?
I mean, there's all kinds of bad stuff going on in Somalia. There's people getting raped left and right, ran by warlords. Kids are running around with AKs.
Is this because we destabilized their government?
Yeah, we used to bomb the shit out of them, and we just stopped.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the point is like at the end of the day, this is one of those situations where, like, I'm looking at it like,
did we bomb them?
You can't do this.
That was a UN action, if I remember right?
I mean, the UN means the US is doing it too. I mean, it's the same thing.
But
nothing happens in the UN without our approval. That's the reason why war crime charges rarely get brought up against us. They never do. Like people try to do UN human rights stuff all the time, and it barely ever gets past the first stage.
War crime charges don't really get brought against most nations.
Right. Well, I mean, they have before. And like I said, anytime there's sanctions, yeah, I mean, they do. Whenever, like Iran, Iraq, anytime the UN wants to sanction somebody we want to sanction,
but
it happens.
That's not.
But anytime someone tries to sanction the U.S., we start threatening people.
But you went from war crimes to sanctions.
Well, yeah, that's what I meant to say. I'm sorry.
That's fine. It's fine.
But the point being is like the sanctions. Like I said, that's one of those things. It's like when people try to sanction us for the things that we do, we start threatening violence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the thing is like, yeah, we have.
Such as
I can look into it. I can send you a few of them. But the point being, again, it's really on the point of like the UN is really kind of a puppet of us. Like, to be honest, now let's be more clear. It's less of a puppet of us and more of a puppet of quote unquote the West, like Germany, Britain, all these. Like a couple of these it's a handful of nations that basically decide it. There are other countries that are in the UN, but and that's actually as designed by the UN. Their vote isn't worth as much as a lot of these other countries, and so it ends up being.
I'd say I think though to an extent that also you have to realize that the UN was was created in the wake of the of World War II and the Cold War, and it was
Right,
essentially
and who was the big enemy of World War II?
the West, the Nazis.
The Germany though is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had Germany as the big enemy in World War II, and they have a bigger seat at the table than several of these other nations. Hell, some of them probably helped us. I don't know. I'd have to look into it. I would bet that some of them helped us and were on our side, and now Germany has a bigger seat at the table. So it's not really a function of they were the bigger guy.
It was created after World War II though, and
right.
It was created after World War II to try to avoid another world war, which was brewing between us and Russia.
How's that working?
I mean, it's worked pretty well.
I'm joking.
It's worked. Look, honestly, it's worked pretty well. And the Ukraine. I mean, there's a lot of aggression going on, and
right.
It's a bad situation, and it's mostly because there's some crazy dude over in Russia who nobody over there really likes either, and yeah, it's a shit situation all over.
Yeah, and I guess that's one thing that I think a lot of people don't understand when I make my arguments of the Ukraine-Russia situation, that I am in no way a fan of Putin at all. I think Putin is a horrible dictator. And a lot of what he does is it's the antithesis of libertarianism. So none of what I ever say should ever be construed as a pro-Putin thing. A lot of what I try to say to people is like, we have to look at this, and the same thing with the history of, like we were talking about 9/11. You can't start the discussion of the history of 9/11 at you can't start it at 9/11. You have to start it before that. You have to be like, okay, well, let me tell you about the Mujahideen. Let me tell you about Afghanistan. Let me tell you about the Soviet Union. Let me tell you about what was going on. We can't start the Russia-Ukraine conflict at the invasion of Ukraine, because there was a lot of stuff that preempted that. So, and there was a lot of stuff that happened beforehand.
So where would you start it?
Honestly, to be fair, would be to start at the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
Which, when we promised, when the new government took over and it became Russia, no longer the Soviet Union, we promised that we wouldn't take NATO past the right half of Germany, because at that point it was East Germany and West Germany. So we wouldn't take it past, one step towards Russia. That was the argument. And now we've taken every country between Germany and Russia all the way up to almost Ukraine.
What were the terms of this promise?
What were the terms? It was just a term of it was basically a armistice. It was what ended the Cold War. It was you tear down this wall between Germany and that. We're not going to come after you. You don't come into the American. That was one of the terms too. They weren't allowed, like with Cuba, or they weren't allowed in the American hemisphere. That was one of the terms of their deal, and they have kept it so far. We have not. Several times we've violated that, to the point where we have a handful of countries between that line and Russia that are all now NATO countries, to the point where now we're trying to get Ukraine into NATO. And if you go and you look, when that push first started, the push to get Ukraine into NATO was around 2014, right? In 2014, that was a big thing, and you had I don't know if it's a good argument revolution coup, whatever the hell you want to call it, but there was an uprising of people who were pushing Ukraine to be more of a Western nation. They wanted us to be more aligned with. They wanted Ukraine to be more aligned with U.S. and Britain and the UK and all of that, and less with Russia.
Well, really quick though, that's the thing there again. and I guess I also wonder how this lines up with libertarianism in that, so like NATO isn't the US. NATO is an international treaty between the US and multiple other countries. It was largely formed against the Soviet Union, and in especially since Putin's taken power and Russia has become more aggressive towards its neighbors and trying to reclaim former Soviet republics again. I feel like that has been a big driver for these countries choosing to join. Like it like you're framing it as us expanding NATO, whereas I see it more as nations nation NATO expanding naturally, like nations that are democratically ruled want to join
Right, but
NATO.
for somebody to get into NATO, they don't just join; they have to be accepted.
Yeah,
And if you've made a deal on behalf of NATO, like if NATO has made a deal to not accept these countries and still accepts them, that's still a violation. And the U.S. did not vote against this being part of this deal. This deal was not just the U.S. You're right; it was between NATO
but it's
and
also it's a defensive
Russia.
treaty, and I guess I'm wondering, like, in the face of an aggressive neighbor, do you really expect should these countries not be allowed to sign up for treaties to protect themselves?
I'm not saying they shouldn't. Like I said, should Russia be able, or should Canada be able to sign a treaty to be part of, be aligned with Russia? Yeah, they should be able to, but at the same time, Russia shouldn't accept it because they made a deal to not.
But
Until you make a new deal, that's the way it is.
But on the flip side, though,
if you make a deal, you stick to that deal.
But you don't. But again, the terms of the deal may change. That's the thing. Is like we can say, should Canada be able to sign that deal, as things are right now? There's no real reason. It's hard to justify that. If say Canada was like facing aggression from us and us trying to annex Quebec or something, sure, I think that them reaching out to sign some sort of treaty with like China, Russia, and all the other people who we're kind of adversarial with now makes a lot of sense, and it would create tension, but it would be a reasonable thing for them to do, and I wouldn't necessarily be upset about it.
Right, and this is a thing that happened over decades, and there was no real reaction, like aggressively, to this. You know what I mean? This happened over decades, but to consider it not a factor and not a provocation is ridiculous. And that's kind of my point. That is a provocation. That's one provocation right there.
But
and then when
I'm wondering,
you take into account, like,
you're talking provocation, but what of Russia's aggressive posturing towards its neighbors? Is that not a provocation for them to?
Oh, I'm not. Like I said, as I started this discussion with, I'm not saying that Russia is great, right? I'm just saying that, like, when you look at this situation, we all know that Russia's bad, right? So what I'm kind of presenting isn't what Putin has done wrong. Like, Putin executes reporters.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, he's not cool. He executes people all the time just for being against him.
Sure, but beyond the actual criticism, I'm more thinking of his policy towards his neighbors and how he has.
Right, and I would not argue that he's the best neighbor to have. That's not what I'm saying. The point I'm making is that when you're talking about an argument between two people, right? You can't sit here and only talk about what one side did wrong. You have to talk about all of it, and that's kind of the situation that I'm saying.
I think though, like the disconnect here is that you're saying that them looking for NATO representation is wrong, whereas I see it as a justified.
I did not say that ever. I said that we accepting them is wrong because we made a deal to not do that.
Okay.
Just like if Russia were to accept someone from the American hemisphere, it would be wrong because they made a deal to not do that. Now, if you want to say, hey, I don't really like this deal, then you sit down and you say, hey, let's make a new deal. They say, hey, I don't want to make a new deal, and say, hey, the deal's off. That's fair. But you can't sit here and expect, like literally have the deal still, you know what I mean?
I guess I'm also wondering though, is like, so you're saying that we made a deal that we wouldn't accept said countries, but I'm sure that there must have been some sort of terms. I'm sure those terms must have had something to do with Russia staying within Russian borders, and as they started to move,
well, no, they were allowed to reabsorb those countries if they wanted to, and the other countries wanted to reabsorb. That was part of the thing and everything, because that was considered the Russian bloc, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. It was once Russia, so it's really not our business. If they want to be part of Russia and Russia wants to be part of it, then it's not our problem. That was kind of the situation. But like I said, the actual stipulation was that they were not allowed, because at that point they were coming in Cuba, dude. So at that point it was a real. It's part of the reason we bought Alaska from them. It was a real concern, for Russia to be on our continent.
I think that we're conflating like time periods here, because Russia was out of the Western Hemisphere for the most part.
Well, they were working with Cuba. They were talking about, that was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, the Cuban Missile Crisis was the 60s. The Cold War ended in the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, late 80s.
Right. But I'm just saying that it was a real concern, them being in our hemisphere at that point.
Sure.
It's not as big of a concern now, but they were also doing a bunch of stuff in South America all through up to the 90s.
Oh, I'd have to review my history. I feel like they were effectively out of Latin America.
Like I said, by the time they fell, they were going broke. So I wouldn't doubt if they'd pulled out and tried to conserve for the last decade or so. That I'm not 100% sure of. But I do know that was a concern that we had, was them being over here, and they were concerned that we were going to be over there. And like I said, at that point, nukes weren't really that fast. You know what I mean? So it gave them enough time to have some kind of warning and know. That was why they set up the lines the way they set them up, was so that way they would know that a nuke was flying through the air. Now it doesn't really matter, to be honest. You have hypersonic missiles, they can shoot one off from Russia and have it here in minutes. Mm-hmm.
So I guess like the thing is though, is like, I'm just like, I don't know. I can't really see the fault in, like, you're saying that like there was a deal, like, that Russia could have reabsorbed the old republics if they all agreed to, and there's an implication that there was like a peaceful thing, whereas Russia has tried to be more forceful in absorbing them. And I don't know.
I'm not saying that they have it,
but I feel like that's a violation of the deal, which would nullify the agreement.
Like, it's looking at like Texas. They wanted to become part of the U.S. and we absorbed them, but there was definitely some violence as a part of it, because not everybody involved. You're never going to get 100%. Mm-hmm. So, like, not everybody involved was okay with it, and Mexico wasn't cool with it.
Yeah.
And at that point, Texas had annexed itself from Mexico. It was already an independent spot, but Mexico was still not cool with us taking it. And like you said, we had a war over it. Just because you have wars and just because you have conflicts doesn't necessarily mean that the people didn't want to be a part of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are multiple revolutions with lots of popular support against being a part of Russia that would kind of show that those former Soviet.
But either way, to move on to the history, because we could be on this all day long. The point is, to move on through the history, you also have you had a group of rebels springing up in Ukraine, right, in 2014. Well, it was probably a little bit earlier than that, but a little bit earlier when they started springing up. But and they were petitioning the government basically to be more Western centric, and and basically it was looking like that's where it was supposed to go. And at the last minute, the guy that was running the government got a bribe from Putin, right? Because that was it was one of Putin's puppet governments. Let's be honest. Like Ukraine wasn't running itself, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
again, like I said, I'm not pro Putin, you know. So like it was one of his little puppet regimes, and he gave a big bribe to the guy that was in charge, and he switched it at the last minute, right? And of course, this made that movement a little even more galvanized. And this is also the point when the Obama State Department ran. At this point, by Biden, the Ukraine policy was ran by Biden, and they started backing the revolutionaries and stoking the revolution. And you have a phone call between Victoria Nuland and another guy in the State Department where they literally were talking about selecting the guy that's in charge. You know what I'm saying? The guy that was in charge right before Zelensky, they picked him. So the election they had was a complete sham. So all that happened was instead of it being a puppet regime for Putin, it became a puppet regime for the U.S. And like I said, I can send you this transcript of this phone call. It's pretty well documented. That, like I said, it ended up being that we just kind of swooped in and did that. Like I said, now don't get me wrong, nobody should puppet another country. But to take the strings of a country from one guy and hand it to the other guy, that is a provocation. You know what I'm saying? I used to have control of this country on my border, and now this country is controlled by my enemy.
See, I think the issue that I have here is that you're framing it in terms of them being either a puppet of one side or the other. Whereas I think that there was a government and it had our help, yes, but I don't know that necessarily our help makes it a puppet. I think that we supported.
If you're literally selecting the guy that runs the country,
that's that.
And then holding election.
That honestly,
you didn't select him.
That honestly doesn't really matter. If we held an election and he won an election.
He didn't though. Like, how do you know he won an election if the guy was selected before the election even was taken?
How was he selected? How would that?
I can send you a phone call where they were literally talking about 3 different people.
Where they were trying to pick the candidates to run, and they picked one.
No, they were picking the guy to run the country. And then they settled on one of the guys. And that's the guy who ended up running it.
Okay, I'd need to know a lot more of the background.
That's a sham election. That's come on now. That's obviously a sham election at that point.
It's not obvious to me. That's the thing, is like, you're saying it's a sham election because there was a phone call where they said, let's run this one guy, and then he won. I'm wondering, it's like, okay, so it was like a strategy thing. It's like you're supporting a popular uprising, and you are calling your allies over there, and you're speaking of the various options that you have for somebody to run for an office, and you strategize with people and pick the strongest candidate who ends up winning because you put a lot of thought into who would be best suited to win an election. I don't know if it's a sham election. That just means that basically means that we consulted, which, I mean, makes sense. You want to consult with people. You want to strategize. You want to kind of figure out everything. I mean,
here, I pulled it up here though, so I can tell you here. We got plugged here. Pyatt said, I think we're in play. The Klitschko, one of the main, which is Klitschko, is one of the 3 main opposition leaders. It says the Kashinko piece is obviously the most complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now. So we're trying to get a read real fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call you want to set up, is exactly the one that you made to Yats, another opposition leader. I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot where he fits in the scenario, and I'm very glad he said what he said in his response. She said, good, I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea. He said, yeah, I guess in terms of him not going into the government, just let him stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. Our problem's going to be Tiny Buck, one of the other opposition leaders, and his guys. I'm pretty sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating in all this. And she said, I think Yats is the guy that has the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy that needs Klitsch and Pennybeck on the outside. He needs them talking to them. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yats. It's just not going to work. So like I said, this is them literally going between the 3 guys and picking Yanukovych.
But there was an election, right?
But they picked the guy before the election happened.
But
so how do you like? That's kind of the question. Is like, can you trust an election that we were involved in? Let's be honest. And like, let's not act like it's brand new for us to be playing around with people's elections. Like it's brand new for us to be installing leaders.
Again, it's just like I'm still not hearing anything there where it's I'm still not drawing this connection where we install the leader. Everything there sounded like strategy.
I mean, I didn't read the whole thing, but I can send it to you.
That's fine. But just again, it still sounds like just a kind of basic strategy and not necessarily, hey, we're gonna put this guy in power. And it sounds like they were discussing who would be the strongest candidate, the various reasons why they thought so, and then they ran that person in the election that they ended up winning. Like I'm just not quite connecting from this phone call to how it indicates that there was a sham election.
Well, like I said, either way, whether or not it is irrelevant to the fact that either way it sends the message that there was. And that's kind of the point, is that even if there's the appearance that there was, and like I said, if you're looking at it from a perspective of Putin, it's definitely not justifiable for him to invade Ukraine. People died. It's disgusting. Like they're literally running in people's houses and shooting them, just regular civilians. It's horrifying, and I'm 100% opposed to that, of course. But I'm saying it kind of makes it understandable where, from a person in his position with his morality, to react that way, if that makes sense.
He was looking for an excuse. I mean, he was many.
And we gave it to him.
We didn't really give him.
That's the point.
We didn't. He tried to take over everything through. I mean, he literally tried to poison their elected leader with the same stuff they got the reporter in London with. Like, they imprisoned the prime minister and beat her. I mean, they violently overthrew a elected government to install their guy, and then there was an uprising that we probably played some part in, where they overthrew the puppet government of Putin and started voting for other people. And like I said, I think that we probably strategized a little bit. We probably gave some advice, but I don't know that like, it's just like, I'm not seeing it as a puppet government is a thing.
I guess it's just somewhere where we disagree. But the point of the matter being still is that, like, when you look at the situation's a lot more complicated than it is, than just
There's
looking at it as like this guy just randomly just decided, woke up one day to invade Ukraine. It's like a little bit more than that.
sort of, but also not really. I mean, it is grossly oversimplified to say that he just woke up and invaded Ukraine. It has a lot more to do with him trying to restore, Russia to its former greatness, a long-standing thing that he's been going with. But essentially, as for all, essentially, yes, that's exactly what it is. He one day woke up and decided to invade Ukraine. And it really kind of is that simple, and there's more explanation into the motivation, but the impetus for his action was that he just woke up one day and decided, hey, this is what we're gonna do.
Yeah,
So
that's just one I can just, again, I guess we just disagree on.
yeah, which is fine, but I mean, it's just, yeah, I don't know. It's just weird because it also seems like it comes from a view that you have that I just can't quite wrap my head around and understand the justification for the view that views, say, like, or an organization like NATO and also our support of former Soviet republics as somehow indicative of them being puppet states. Like, I get why Putin would feel that way. I just don't know that's necessarily true. And I mean, hey, part of that could be that we're, let's not pretend like we're in some sort of like super open society, and there isn't some shady stuff, and that we're not being propagandized to a certain extent. But I don't know. I also just don't know that it's on the same level for things like what's going on in Ukraine, where like we could really, I don't know. It just seems like it's above the board. There's like actual popular support for us on the ground, and
Oh, like
it's
I
very
hope you don't think that. Again, that's not even the thing. I'm not even trying to have a moral equivalency to us in Russia either.
no,
That's
no,
not
no.
even the argument that I'm making either.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying, like, I feel like we are supporting a genuine movement on the ground there. It's not, whereas like you seem to like be trying to frame it as something where the popular movement is some sort of puppet of us that wouldn't exist without us telling them to go do
Now,
it.
don't get me wrong. I don't think that the people who are fighting in Ukraine right now are just like I do think they support us. Obviously, that's why they're fighting. But I don't think. I think that part of a
Oh,
revolution is, well, living it. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't mean that in a messed up way. I'm just kind of thinking that, like, if you go through history, like, if it's too easily won, they don't cherish it enough. Is what I'm kind of saying. And I don't think that we shouldn't help at all. I don't think that at all. But I think that if we end up being the troops for them, then again we're going to end up in a lot of the same situation we're in Afghanistan and a lot of these other places where it's just a place we've bombed to bits and rolled out because like like I said, it's like it's one of those things that these guys have to fight it so that way everybody looks at them. Like at the end of the Revolutionary War, right? People basically deified the founders because they were the guys that fought off the bad guys. You know what I mean? And that produced some bad things, but it also produced a camaraderie with the country that made it where the country could kind of really have a solid foundation to move forward, if that makes sense. You know, they had something to unite around.
it's well, I mean, they didn't really unite all that quickly or all that well.
Right.
I mean,
I mean, they
I've
didn't,
read it.
again,
I've read a good bit, and it's like I don't know. Even the founders were by and large not the people who necessarily fought.
right.
Like,
Oh, I'm not saying that. But a lot of them, I mean, yes and no. Washington was the one that everybody really loved, and they loved him because he was the general of the army and he was fighting. Part of the reason he was pretty much genuinely loved about all these people, by all these people, was because he was on the front lines and he was pretty well known for being quote unquote wise. I disagree with a lot of Washington. Like I've said numerous times, my favorite is Thomas Paine. But like, if you actually look at it, a lot of those people were fighting. Thomas Paine was fighting on those lines. He wasn't one that was hiding behind his pen like some of the other rich founders. Yeah, a lot of them were rich guys. You know, all they were doing was giving money to the war, really. But
Sort of.
money is helpful. You got to feed people.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, that was definitely the source of my favorite founder and his fall from grace. But
Who's your favorite founder?
oh, it's an unconventional pick. It's Benedict Arnold.
Benedict Arnold, huh?
100%. We would have lost the war if it were not for him.
Who do you think? What do you like so much about Benedict Arnold? We'll end on what do we like so much about our favorite founders.
So essentially like you said, like there was a money thing, and his whole thing was like, you know, he was a fairly well off pharmacist. He essentially funded and joined the revolution, probably seeking glory, trying to make a name for himself,
Right.
make him famous, and he did quite a lot of crazy things. He led an insane expedition up to Canada through Maine, which was like kind of brutal. Like half his guys left. They were like eating dogs and their shoes and stuff to try to survive because nobody knew how cold it got up there, and they didn't have any good maps. And he went up there and he fought the Battle of Quebec, which he lost. But in retreating from that all the way down, he delayed the British from being able to take the Hudson River, which would have cut the colonies in half. And essentially, like, you take the economic powerhouse that was the southern colonies and cut it off from the revolutionary fervor that you had centered around Boston, which would have probably just stifled the revolution, cut it out, prevented things from going back and forth. And a lot of that was like some weird, like, Benedict Arnold raised the first American Navy and fought a battle that held off the on Lake Champlain that stopped the British Navy from advancing. He went down to Saratoga and fought a battle there. He disobeyed orders from his superior officer, rode in and kind of like single-handedly like shot a bunch of British generals and won the battle. And that was what got the French in on our side, which really is what turned the tide of war in our favor. So, and then after that, there was like a lot of bitterness, and that's when he turned traitor. But the thing is, like, there were a lot of traitors in the revolution, and the reason why his name is so big is because he was such a consequential figure in the fight, and he was he was as famous as George Washington.
Right.
So, you know, and then he betrayed his country, and that was why it was so notable, was because it was like he was like the dude, and they're like, oh wow, he's not what we thought. It was kind of that. It was a bigger betrayal because he was so popular and such a big deal.
That's very interesting. A lot of that I didn't actually know. But the interesting thing about Thomas Paine was a young guy, right, in UK or Britain or wherever the hell, and he actually came over with Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin thought he was a nobody. He was a poor kid that's just smart as hell. And Ben Franklin was like, this kid's smart as hell. I'm going to take him under my wing, and he was mentoring him. And he came over, and that's when he wrote Common Sense, which you can fact check me on this. It's really cool. It's actually the best-selling book by an American author ever written.
All right.
It's pretty interesting. Like, it sold like hotcakes. Everybody was reading the hell out of it. It's actually like pretty well known as the spark that led the revolution. Mm-hmm. And you know, he was basically the bard, right? And after the American Revolution got kicked off pretty well, he actually went to France, right? He's actually part of the way that, kind of like an ambassador between him and Ben Franklin, getting the French, trying to get the French on our side, one, and also he was starting a revolution in France.
Mm-hmm.
So he ended up actually starting the French, helping start the first French Revolution, at which time they tried to kill him. So he left and went back to the United States. And he actually left and went to Britain at this point. And Britain was like, okay, you wrote some stuff in America and started a revolution. You wrote some stuff in France and started a revolution. No, you can't be here. So they tried to kill him basically upon getting to Britain. And so he left again and went back to France. And at this point, he started another revolution in France, the Second Revolution. Not started, but helped.
Mm-hmm.
He helped start that revolution. And then again, they tried to kill him. So he left and went to America at this point, right? This point, the American Revolution was already over. And they were starting, Washington was actually running to fight the Whiskey Rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where he became one of the most hated people in American politics at the time, because he came out and basically said, so you're telling me Washington doesn't want to pay taxes on whiskey to pay for a war they didn't want to fight? Does that sound familiar, Americans? You know what I'm saying? And that was basically, he called out he continued to the rest of his life calling out the founders for their hypocrisy. I think it was 7 people were at his funeral because he was so hated. He came out against both Protestantism and Catholicism and said all organized religion was horrifying. He was the only founder that never owned a slave and was completely against it, voraciously against it the entire time. He came out and called them all hypocrites for the whole, all men are created equal. He was fighting for women's rights. He thought that women should be able to not only should they have the right to vote, but should have equal rights as men in the new country.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, the reason why he's my favorite is I'm a libertarian, man. I'm a purist. The guy that actually believed what he was saying. That's the guy who I think is the best.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who said, hey, principle tells me, like society tells me that women are stupid and they're lower and they can't know any better, but principle tells me that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Society tells me these people should be slaves. Principle tells me they're men and they have a right to self-determination. He followed principle over what was expedient, and I think that's an inspiration to me. Even if it meant alienating everybody, speak the truth.
Yeah, I can see that. But yeah. Something have to crack back open common sense. It's been
yes,
probably a decade or so since I've
is
read it.
It's a short story worth of length. It is not a whole lot to read, and you just read it and you're like, man, this man is spitting. He was one thing I thought was really interesting from Common Sense was he was saying that he thought that the Constitution and all of the laws should be brought out periodically. A crown should be placed upon the Constitution. It should be broken into pieces and distributed to the people to let everybody know that the law is king here, not anyone. No person is king. The law is what's king.
Mm-hmm.
And the law comes from you, so separate the power back to the people. He thought that ceremony should be held the same as a coronation to replace coronations.
Sure.
And that was it's pretty interesting when you start reading what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of what he was saying was kind of the true quote unquote anarchy. As anarchists say, it's not about no rules, it's about no rulers. No one being above the rules.
Mm-hmm.
No one being able to say, hey, this is a different situation, the rules don't apply. that is what true anarchy really is. It's not saying the society might not have any rules or even anybody that people look to as leaders. It's saying that no one is above what the rules are. No one is a ruler.
Yeah. Oh, gotcha. So yeah.
But I appreciate you coming along. I know it was a nice lengthy one.
Appreciate the opportunity. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Quite possible. Maybe we'll do one with a couple of people next time.
So you can get a little round table going.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Especially if we can get somebody, more on the conservative side, have somebody maybe even, especially if we get Walt. We both have to
We'll try talking
pester him. That would be awesome. That would be awesome.
For sure.
All right. Well, I appreciate everybody for tuning in.
Yep. Thanks, guys. And yeah, have a good night.